Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us this afternoon. We're going to give Zoom a couple of minutes to let all the participants in. As you're settling in, we would love for you to respond to this question in the chat and tell us something you love about commencement on your campus. Again, as everyone's coming on, we're just taking a few minutes to let everyone get settled. And we would love for you to drop into the chat your favorite part of commencement at your institution. I'm seeing a lot of folks with that first theme right off the bat, seeing families, the look on everyone's faces. Oh, Sandra O is speaking. That's so cool. Now I'm jealous. Oh, cherry blossoms. Very nice. So I'm pretty much seeing excitement on everyone's faces, families, good speakers. Oh yeah, good weather. Totally agree. Oh, singing the alma mater. That's nice. How everyone decorates their caps. That's exciting. It's nice to have something to celebrate after all the hard work. All right, we'll let a few more comments come in. Oh, first gen college students and their families. Yep, that's great. Yeah. That a lot of investment in these students and seeing them move on, that seems to be a common theme. Oh yeah, seeing everyone in their academic regalia. I love that too. That's so cool. That's just not something you see in other industries as much. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Hopefully you feel like you're in your 24, 25 home stretch. And let's get this conversation started. I'm Mary Aviles, and I am our Insight and Experience Lead at the Constructive Dialogue Institute and one of the authors of the report we're going to be talking about today. I will be co-moderating this webinar with our CDI's co-founder and executive director, Caroline Mail. I want to share a few housekeeping items. Yes, we will be sending out the slides and the recording after the webinar to anyone who's registered, so you will see that probably within the next day or so. We will have time for our panelists to answer a few questions after each of their sections, and we hope to get a few more questions before the end. As these questions occur to you, please put them in the Q&A. You'll find that button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You don't need to wait until the end to submit your questions, but please note that for the rest of our webinar, we are turning off the chat, so the only way you'll be able to communicate is on the Q&A. Okay, so joining me today, as I said, is our co-founder and executive director, Caroline Mail. Caroline will begin our discussion by framing the campus culture report and sharing some of the highlights. We hope you've already downloaded the report, but if you haven't, Gabby's going to share the link in Q&A so that you can just copy it and see it and download it later. Now let me tell you a bit about our two panelists. Caroline, if you want to move the slides. All right, our wonderful panelists. First, you'll be hearing from Maya Ferdman as the Deputy Director of UCLA's Bidari Kindness Institute and a skilled facilitator of difficult conversations. Maya brings her expertise in cross-cultural bridge building to promote belonging across diverse communities. Drawing from her Jewish Argentinian heritage and extensive experience facilitating dialogues on complex issues like racial equity, policing, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, she founded Bridges Intergroup Relations Consulting to help organizations create inclusive environments. Her work spans multiple sectors, from government to nonprofits, where she combines her academic background in global and Latin American studies with practical approaches to kindness, dialogue across difference, and intergroup relations. Then you will hear from Dr. Lolo Huang. Renowned for her expertise in public health, social justice, and student leadership development, Lolo brings transformative approaches to student engagement as Georgia Tech's inaugural VP for Student Engagement and Wellbeing. Having delivered over 3,400 presentations and keynoted more than 90 conferences, she combines teaching excellence with practical student development and with practical experience in promoting holistic student development and wellness. Her interdisciplinary background across psychology, public health, and women's studies informs her innovative approaches and strategies for handling student success in higher education environments. I hope you're as interested in hearing about their initiatives as I am. Let's take a quick look at today's agenda, and then I'll pass the mic to Caroline to talk about the Campus Culture Change Report. Alrighty, so what we're going to be talking about today, some quick key insights from the report. Then you'll hear about UCLA and what they've got going on. Then you'll hear about Georgia Institute of Technology, and then we'll do Q&A and wrap up. Okay, now Caroline's going to set the stage for the Campus Culture Study.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to begin by just talking a little bit about the context that prompted us to pursue this report. So as I'm sure you all know well, American higher education is at a critical inflection point. For generations, colleges and universities have served as trusted spaces for intellectual growth and societal advancement. But today, this trusted position is increasingly tenuous. Public confidence in higher education has declined significantly over the past decade, with recent surveys showing that only 36% of Americans express a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher education, which is down from nearly 60% in 2015. This erosion of trust comes from multiple directions. The first is that there are questions about affordability and value. The second is that there are concerns around ideological bias. And the third is that there are doubts about whether we're adequately preparing students for tomorrow's challenges. And while addressing this trust deficit requires more than new policies or programs, it requires genuine culture change. And as we all know, changing culture is profoundly difficult work. The data on culture change is sobering. McKinsey reports that approximately 70% of culture change initiatives fail. And there tend to be 5 common reasons for that failure. The first is that culture operates through invisible forces. It's not written down, but it's deeply understood. Seth Godin, a best-selling author on culture and leadership, defines culture as a shared understanding that people like us do things like this. So these behavioral patterns spread both horizontally through peer networks and vertically through leadership actions and institutional structures without us really seeing how those pieces are spreading through the system. The second factor is complexity, and this challenge is particularly acute in higher education, where our decentralized structures lead to increased complexity, where there can be misalignment between institutions, departments, and teams. The third factor is that there are a lot of external pressures that make culture change increasingly difficult. In our current climate, political polarization and legal constraints are particularly acute. The fourth is that measuring culture is extremely challenging. And so it's hard to know whether you're shifting culture and how you're doing on this culture change effort if you are unsure of how you're even measuring what outcomes you're after. And then the fifth boils down to our basic human resistance to change. And so adding all those factors together, this task can seem overwhelming. But within this challenge, there's also tremendous opportunity. The universities who are successfully rebuilding trust aren't avoiding difficult conversations. They're embracing them with intention and purpose. They're showing us that constructive dialogue across differences isn't just compatible with higher education's mission, but it's essential to fulfilling it. We've conducted research with more than 100 institutions nationwide and synthesized those findings into practical strategies for driving culture change. And we found that at a time when public confidence in higher education is being tested, forward-thinking institutions are strengthening their civic commitment through building cultures of constructive dialogue. In particular, our research revealed there are 4 primary ways that universities are leveraging constructive dialogue to advance their key objectives. The first is intellectual inquiry. As universities foster critical thinking and understanding, constructive dialogue helps students meaningfully engage with challenging and varied perspectives. The second is campus cohesion. Constructive dialogue creates bridges across differences, transforming potential division into institutional strength. The third is civic preparedness. Dialogue practices equip students with skills to navigate our pluralistic society. It gives students the skills they need to be able to discuss differences in ways that strengthen our society and community, as opposed to, again, foster greater division. And lastly, the fourth is workplace readiness. So as institutions develop career-ready graduates, the same constructive dialogue skills of navigating disagreement and solving problems collaboratively that help support a flourishing democracy are exactly what employers are also looking for in new hires. The universities who are succeeding in this moment are those recognizing that constructive dialogue is not an end of itself, but it's a versatile tool that strengthens their fundamental missions. Our research has also made clear that there's no single pathway to successful culture change. Each institution must find approaches that align with its unique mission, history, and community. But there are common threads that we found that run through successful efforts. So the first is that this work requires genuine leadership commitment, not just in words, but in resources, policies, and personal example. The second is that effective dialogue initiatives don't happen in isolation. They're integrated across academics, student life, and administrative functions of the university. The third is that measurement matters. The institutions who are making progress are those that define what success looks like and track their progress toward it. And finally, this is long-term work. Culture change does not happen overnight, but each step forward strengthens higher education's ability to fulfill its essential societal mission. Our report spotlights campus leaders who have successfully integrated dialogue practices that deepen intellectual rigor, strengthen community, and equip graduates for the complex challenges ahead. The institutions profiled in this report and whose representatives are here with us today show us that while culture change is difficult, it's possible when approached with intention and purpose. So for the rest of our time today, we're going to hear from Maya and Lolo about the impactful work that they're spearheading at their institutions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maya to share more about her work at UCLA.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And thank you so much to the Constructive Dialogue Institute for having me and for leading this report. I'm so excited to really dig into it and to see the ways in which we can improve our work even more. So good morning for those of you on the Pacific Coast like me, and good afternoon for those of you anywhere else. My name is Maya Ferdman. I am the Deputy Director of the Bidari Kindness Institute at UCLA, which is an interdisciplinary research institute dedicated to understanding and advancing kindness in the world. The Bidari Kindness Institute is the administrative home to two initiatives: the Dialogue Across Difference Initiative, of which I'm the staff director, which I'll dig into in more detail, and the Initiative to Study Hate, which is a pilot program that's an interdisciplinary research platform to understand and mitigate group-based hatred. So these are three distinct but also deeply interconnected efforts that we have under the rubric of the Bidari Kindness Institute. I'm going to focus on the Dialogue Across Difference initiative because that's the most relevant for today, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that you may have about the other two initiatives or the Institute in general at large. But the Dialogue Across Difference initiative is a multi-pronged and cross-campus effort to build a culture of dialogue at UCLA. We want to advance these values of active listening, empathy, curiosity, intellectual engagement, and critical thinking across lines of difference on UCLA's campus. Similar to what Caroline said, with the recognition that these capacities and these values are actually core to what it means to be an institution of higher learning in this country today. And so before I go into all of the work that we do in order to advance these values, I want to give a brief history about how we got to where we are, who we are, because it's interesting. You know, I'm sure every campus is a little different as to how these initiatives have come up, and that sort of impacts how we're structured. So we were initially conceived of in January of 2023, so over 2 years ago already, by our Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Darnell Hunt, who recognized that we were losing the ability to talk to one another as a campus community and also, of course, as a country. And he actually was able to recognize that these capacities are core to our educational mission. And so he appointed a committee to evaluate how might we model the values of active listening, empathy, et cetera, across difference. And the initial vision that he had, or that the committee had, was for a speaker series to demonstrate in a public way what it looks like, because we don't have so many examples of meaningful dialogue across difference. Very quickly, they realized that they would get far more bang for their buck with a multi-pronged and multi-directional approach. So, we realized the budget for the refreshments of a large event would take up half of the budget that they were allocated. So they quickly said, why don't we flip the switch a little bit and come up with a four-pronged mode of engagement? And I'll dig deep into this in the next slide in a minute, but those four prongs that they came up with were student engagement, teaching, public programming and communication, and training. And so one of the first activities that they developed an implementation committee, created new partnerships with different campus entities, which I can share more about. They were going to launch a student cohort, a student leadership cohort of 13 students, both graduate and undergraduate, to learn over the course of a year key dialogue skills and then plan a dialogue program on campus. That was planned to launch on October 15th of 2023. And we were planning to announce this initiative publicly. And then, of course, October 7th happened. And with October 7th and the violence of that day and the violence that followed, we experienced, like so many on our campuses across the country, a level of polarization, a level of rupture that I think few of us have ever experienced before. Some of folks at UCLA said this was the hardest year of their multi-decade careers on campus. And so, we continued our work, but we did it softly. We did it more quietly to avoid sort of the impression that this was reactive, but rather this was long planned and long planned effort to build this culture of dialogue. So we continued with our work in different ways. It was both harder than ever before, and yet also the demand for the workshops that we started to provide, for the types of student engagement that we were offering, increased manifold. And so all of us were on this sort of fractional time trying to make it work. In the spring quarter of last year, we experienced, almost a year ago to the day, at UCLA, we experienced violence on our campus as students on our campus were attacked. We experienced a rupture in trust at almost every level of the university. It was really a dark time. And so we asked ourselves, how can we renew our commitment? How can we sort of double down on this commitment to build to this long-term vision of what it means to navigate difference on campus? And that's where the opportunity arose to come under the administrative wing of the Bidari Kindness Institute. And so that home, which is in the Division of Social Sciences, but is operating in a cross-campus way, came up. I came on board full time. David Myers, who's the professor, who's the director of the Bidari Kindness Institute, came on board full time with BKI. And that allowed us a little bit more flexibility and ability to do our work in a sustained fashion. And so I give that history in part just to all of you who are interested in sort of how things happen at a large, unwieldy institution like UCLA. This is sort of how we landed. And also our director, David, is an historian. And so we always start with history because that helps us understand how we got to where we are. So let me dig a little more into what we do with the Dialogue Across Difference initiative. We have these four prongs of activity. So Caroline mentioned that this sort of multimodal approach to culture change. And this is really what we are aiming for with our four prongs of activity. There's student engagement, so wanting to help and support our students to navigate, to have those skills, to have that muscle for navigating difference, both while they're on their campus, but also as a way to prepare them for the broader world ahead. Teaching is essential. The ability to navigate differences in the classroom is a core function of or should be a core function of the educational mission. We didn't want to lose that original vision of public programming, of modeling those values, and so we sustained that prong of activity. And then finally, training. We want to build the skills, the muscle for navigating dialogue on campus. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper into what that actually looks like. So student engagement, I mentioned this student leadership cohort that we launched with last year. We did not continue that this year because we wanted to create more broad opportunities for students beyond, we still find a lot of value in a cohort model and actually are exploring what that would look like to continue with it. But in the meanwhile, this year, we have launched a new internship So these are students who've been engaged with us either through that original cohort or through different workshops and programs to come to be interns, to advance our work in different ways, to have work experience, and to be ambassadors for dialogue on campus. So some of them are RAs, residential assistants, some of them are doing other things on campus, and they see, how can I bring dialogue into my space on campus? We also just this quarter launched something called the Bruin Bridge Builders Fund, which is a pool of funding and grants available to students for two different reasons. One is training grants. So if a student wants to, for instance, access CDI's fantastic facilitation training, or access other kinds of learning opportunities at Interfaith America or at other national or local institutions that offer bridging related skill sets, we want to create an opportunity, a bridge for them to be able to access those things and to bring their learning back to campus. And so we have launched this fund for that reason, and a program grant. So we are providing funds and support to students who have their own dialogue related ideas. And so I'll speak more to that in a minute. Under the teaching prong of engagement, we are doing two major activities at the moment. One is sponsoring a suite of what we call Fiat Lux seminars. Fiat Lux means let there be light. It is one of the mottos of the UC. And these are 1 unit pass no pass seminars. It's a really great program that the UC offers. And we are sponsoring faculty who teach Fiat Lux seminars under the rubric of dialogue. So these have looked like, this is the second year that we're doing it. We did a cohort last year and a cohort this year. And these are courses that advance dialogue either in form or content. So we've had a course, for example, that looks at how do you talk to people who have differences around vaccines? A nursing course, for example, or another course that was about how do we understand difference when it comes to food and taste, and how can we navigate cultural differences that way. David and I are teaching a Fiat Lux this quarter on different approaches to dialogue across difference. So we're bringing guest speakers who bridge differences in the US, internationally, and also locally in Los Angeles with LAPD or in schools. We also have a faculty fellowship, which is a deep partnership that we have with our Teaching and Learning Center, which is a cohort of 16 faculty members this year from everywhere from the law school to the School of Public Health, to our writing programs, to psychiatry. All of the faculty who are participating are either launching a new course or revising a course in the interest of advancing dialogue across difference in the classroom. And they come together for regular community of practice sessions throughout the year to build those skill sets, to build a community of practice across discipline for doing that. So they're teaching courses on there's a sociology course that about gender. And how do we talk about gender across lines of difference? How do we talk about writing programs, how do we talk about toxic discourse and ethical discourse in a toxic time? And so this is a really great way of building community of faculty who are committed to the values of dialogue in the classroom and to reaching even more students that way in sort of a ripple effect kind of way. We then, of course, as I said, we continue with our public programming. One is in our Compassionate Conversation series. So this is a co-sponsored series with our Bidari Kindness Institute and Initiative to Study Hate and Dialogue Across Difference, which we've held a series of different public programs over the course of the year that are either elevating research related to kindness, compassion, empathy, and dialogue, or modeling what this looks like in practice. So for example, we brought Dr. Jamil Zaki earlier this year, who's the author of The War for Kindness, which was actually UCLA's common book this year. So every year, there's all the freshmen at UCLA get the same book to read. And this year it was The War for Kindness. And then they have activations throughout the year to help them generate these shared experiences and shared language for entering their new environment. And so we brought Jamil Zaki to share about his research related to empathy, related to bridging differences, and related to kindness on campus. We also brought an organization called the Parent Circle which is a nonprofit of Palestinian and Israeli family members who've lost loved ones to the conflict and choose to come together and engage in peace building efforts. And with they share their stories, and then we actually have a dialogue component afterwards. So participants stay and actually reflect on what they heard with one another, with strangers that just heard the same thing after the public program. And so we want to, with every public program, create spaces for deep engagement across differences, whether that's difference of reaction or opinion related to what they just heard, or differences of position or identity. We have, a lot of students that come, faculty, staff, but also alumni and others. We also have a digital clearinghouse. So we recognize that we are not the sole holders of dialogue expertise on campus, but actually there is already a wealth of activity that is happening at UCLA related to bridge building skills. And so we are working with our Office of Inclusive Excellence to map what that looks like. Who are the folks in the School of Education, in the business school, in the medical school that are already building bridges through different methodologies, and how can we come together to learn from one another? And then finally, training is really our most, I would say, developed prong of engagement. So if we just click one more time, that is the skill building. So we think about what is the muscle that we need to inculcate into our campus. What is the skill set that needs to be developed that's oftentimes not innate, or maybe not necessarily activated. Those are skills of how do you engage across difference? If you're just talking with your roommate, right, and you have a difference, how do you facilitate across difference if you're holding a class or if you're the chair of a department? And then finally, how do you convene across difference? So this is how do you hold an event, for instance, that engages different kinds of perspectives. We have a deep partnership with the nonprofit Resetting the Table, which some of you may be familiar with, a national nonprofit dedicated to building courageous communication across charged divides. And we're trying to bring their unique approach to conflict transformation to the campus. So I'm a trainer with them and have been holding workshops. They're speaking across conflict workshop with audiences from our vice chancellors and deans, to our alumni board, to our legal counsel, to students of all levels. So we are trying to build a shared language for how we do difference at UCLA. And we've partnered with Resetting the Table to take up a chunk of their Train the Trainer cohort so that others on campus can actually do the same thing. So this methodology is one that we're uplifting, but also complementing the existing expertise on our campus. So just to close off, I'll just say that everything that we're doing is in deep partnership with different entities on campus. We partner with our student affairs friends. We partner with our teaching and learning center. We partner with our Office of Inclusive Excellence, with our senior leadership. And we feel really fortunate to be able to do that kind of broad work across campus, because UCLA is enormous, and that is really the only way to achieve the kind of culture change that Caroline spoke about earlier. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much.
Maya, thank you so much for walking through all the work that you've been doing. It's incredibly impressive to hear what you've accomplished in really such a short period of time. So thank you for sharing. There are quite a number of questions that have come in already. So the first question that I'll share is someone from the K-12 education space is attending today, and they were curious whether you get the sense that college admissions officers are actively looking for students who demonstrate these types of bridging skills or interest in this type of work already before they get to campus.
It's a great question. And I can't say that I have any familiarity with the admissions process. So unfortunately, I can't quite speak to that. What I will say is that once students are on the campus, those skills are incredibly valuable and valued, at least at UCLA. We are thinking about what are the pipelines that we want to create? I'm actually just in conversations with some nonprofits in LA who are working with K through 12 students on peer mediation skills and other kinds of dialogue skills to think about how can we then market or show that UCLA is a place for them to continue to practice those skills, both to continue learning about those skills, but then with things like our Brew and Bridge Builders Fund, implement them. So I would say that, if you think about what does it take to be an RA? What does it take to be the leader of a student club? What does it take to engage well in a classroom? Those are dialogue skills. And so I can't really speak to what does that look like from an admissions perspective, but I can speak to what does it look like that this is now being more and more valued as a leadership capacity for students on campus.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And another question that came up was whether you ever partner with the chaplaincy or religious life offices through your work.
It's a good question. So we want to deepen those partnerships. We're definitely in conversation with them and invite them to some of the stuff that we've done. I would say, we're a partner. We've had conversations. We have an interfaith living and learning community on our campus, a dorm that is designed to have interfaith engagement. We've had some applications for our Bridge Fund that come from religiously based organizations. And so that's something that we're really interested in and want to do more of.
Great. And another question that was posed that I hear quite a bit is, do you notice that the people who are attending, especially the students who are attending your programming, tend to be the same students, or are you seeing a varied student population? And if so, how are you achieving that?
Right. Yes, and we do see a lot of return students for sure. And we see sort of the deepening commitment of the students who keep coming back. And part of the reason that we have this multi-pronged approach, we have workshops for students, we have public programs for students, now we have a funding opportunity, and we have courses that are taught by faculty who are engaged by us, is so that we can start building our audience. And we do see through all of those different entry points, new students all the time. And so the best advertisement or the best promotion that we have for our workshops is actually coming from our faculty fellows who are offering, without me asking, it's kind of beautiful, extra credit for their students who go to our Speaking Across Conflict workshops. And so we get new freshmen that way. We get students from the engineering school that way, from math, from art, who come in various different avenues. And so I would say it's a both and.
Great. And one final question before we move on to Lolo is, have you encountered students or faculty who think that dialogue across differences normalizes hateful or harmful ideas? And if so, how do you respond to those concerns?
It's a great question. So just so I understand correctly, it's asking, do students think, are there any particular entities on campus that think that we're normalizing hate in some form? Is that
I think that's that by giving voice to different perspectives and encouraging dialogue around these very sensitive topics, that is normalizing hateful views.
Or so there's definitely a lot of maybe skepticism or suspicions from some parts of our community around what is dialogue trying to achieve. Are you trying to sort of enter into some respectability politics, for example, where you're going to control how I speak and how I'm feeling about a particular issue? Or are you trying to detract or normalize saying like everyone is accepted at the table, even those people who are hateful, right? So I can definitely appreciate that criticism, and it absolutely exists. What I would say is, one is to understand where those concerns are coming from, that sometimes they can be valid concerns, and to invite people in rather than to say that they're wrong, but rather to say, what is the concern about? Are you trying to, if the concern is you're controlling how I speak, right? Then our response is actually we are giving you another tool in your toolbox that you can choose to utilize if you choose, but we do not want to tell you how to talk or what to believe or who to engage with. But in the moment that you do want to engage, here is a tool that can be useful to you. So we are trying to say that this is in your interest, and it is not something that we are trying to force down anyone's throats. So that's one way. Another is to say it's not for everyone at all times, and that's okay. That if somebody feels under threat in some way or feels like dialogue is not politically useful to them, we're not going to force them to engage. That's actually also part of what it means to be a pluralistic campus, is to recognize that there are different strategies out there to different ends. And so we want to advance this as a way of being and doing conflict and difference on campus. We recognize that that's not always going to be the way everyone chooses to engage.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And there are many more questions. We'll have more time at the end for Q&A, but for now, I'll pass it over to Lolo.
Okay, terrific. So thanks for this opportunity to be in community to talk about a really relevant and timely issue, given what we're going through as a collective community. So appreciate this opportunity to be part of this program with CDI. So I think I was listening to Maya's presentation with great interest, because I feel like in a lot of ways we arrived at the same desired outcome, but our pathway is, oh, it's so different. So I'm going to tell a tale of some political intrigue and, and drama. So I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on the how and the why for us. So I'm at Georgia Institute of Technology, or Georgia Tech, as we are fondly known. We are, in fact, a public institution. A lot of the misperception that I get with people who I first meet do perceive that we are private. We are not. So we are public as well, and on the other side of the U.S., if so. I'm finishing up my 4th year here, so I feel like I've been here long enough to be able to understand and describe our culture, but also recognizing that it took a while to be able to really understand it. And when I think of culture change, it's about shifting the policies, the practices, the places, the philosophies, the people, all in the same direction, right? Towards the change that you are headed towards. So I'm going to start by sharing that I was brought to Georgia Tech specifically because I have a background in both student affairs and public health. And so when the search firm reached out, they're like, this is the job for you. This is the chief wellbeing officer and the chief student affairs officer for the institution. And Georgia Tech is really interested in someone coming to help address issues of mental health, very specifically, and well-being more broadly. So that was what I spent my time focused on when I first got here. My first year was spent doing an extensive listening tour with students first. And I want to clarify, we're an interesting campus compared to other institutions I've been at, but I think describing who we are is important. This year, we topped 53,000 in enrollment. We are more graduate student than undergraduate student, even though we sometimes act like we're more undergraduate. So of that 53, over 33,000 are graduate students. And then we are distinguished by having a robust, fully online master's program, which is now about 20,000, right, of those grad students. And then of our first year, of our undergraduate students, 97% live on campus. We about 9,000 beds on campus. So I came here starting that with a listening tour. And what came out loud and clear is, yes, we're concerned about the mental health issues, but really what struck me is how often our students and even our faculty and staff talked about feeling alone, the social isolation. And then lo and behold, our US Surgeon General released a report 18 months later and said, social isolation is a public health crisis in the United States. So we really focused on that and led with belonging and trying to address belonging as a key factor in social wellness. We are advancing an 8 dimensions of wellness approach. And what we said is you cannot just talk about emotional wellness or mental health if we're not addressing all 8 dimensions of wellness, because they are interdependent and inter-influencing. Then it's going to be challenging to help our students really achieve positive growth or advancement in that area. So we're moving along in this direction. And then in spring of 2022, so I started in 2021, August, our governor signed into law a bill, HB 1, that then changed the landscape on free speech in the state of Georgia. So a couple things that needed to happen is that every new student coming in had to receive training on their rights and responsibilities around free speech. We had to have robust policies that were promulgated and easily accessed, et cetera. And what I will say is my team pivoted. We had the experience and the ability to connect with students. So we had 1 year to comply. So by fall 2023, I want to just keep in mind, October 7th was 2023. Okay, so it was very timely that we were able to launch new time, place, manner procedures. They were interim procedures because we could address only outdoor facilities. That first year, we didn't have enough time to get to all of it. And we developed a training that we got in front of all of our entering students. And then my opening newsletter for that fall pushed out that information. So here we are, we're launching. I'm really proud of our team in terms of the work that they did in getting together, I think, quality educational materials and really thoughtful, purposeful communications to get the word out. And then we hit the road, right? We had a road show to really emphasize the training, targeting student leaders. Then October 7th happened. I will say, compared to our peers, for example, in the local metropolitan Atlanta area, we did not have the same degree of disruptive or protest activity as, for example, my colleagues at Emory or Georgia State, right? Both literally down the road from us. But we did have a lot of painful conversations for our students. So I don't want to describe that we didn't have incidents that were of a protest activity or that students described as disruptive. But we, I think, as a campus, really grappled with the ability to talk to each other about these things. It's important to keep in mind we're a STEM institution. It's amazing what we're doing, right? We're curing things, we're inventing things, we're defending the country, we're saving lives with the research and innovation that we're doing. But as a predominantly STEM institution, some of the traditional areas that, you know, I could count on, for example, at my previous institution, having a robust cadre of faculty and staff colleagues to either message on or to rely on as resources to provide educational outreach to our community was not as robust. The capacity was not there. So as we went through the year, what became clear were a couple things. We were facing attacks on DEI as a state. And so one of the critiques is that DEI, or wokeness, I'm putting that in quotes because I think it's important to understand, right, how the word was being used when not necessarily what it was intended, but or what it was designed to mean originally. But that was sort of the narrative, was that wokeness was leading to a suppression of free speech. Okay, so you have one narrative that says DEI actually is counter to free speech, and free speech is important. The second thing we had were students saying that I'm feeling even more isolated because I'm having these challenges around having difficult conversations. Our faculty were saying, it's clear our students want to be able to talk about this in the classroom, but I'm not sure I have the capacity. I teach math and I want to be there for my students and I want to show up, but this is not my wheelhouse. So how do I engage in that regard? And then I saw us struggle as professionals, right? As the administration and as colleagues, and, you know, the vulnerability of just acknowledging that this isn't something we've had to have the skill set to address. So our president was participating in national conversations as a president with other presidents across the country and really encouraged us to say, hey, how can we get more education out there to our students, but also our staff and faculty? So that's what I really appreciate is our president wanted an educational intervention that was available to everyone in the community, not just students. So thus the idea was born that ultimately resulted in us working and partnering with Constructive Dialogue Institute. But the idea was, how do we get out? So we've been spending a year talking about, here are your rights. You have rights to free speech, freedom of inquiry and expression. It's one of our 11 strategic values, freedom of expression and inquiry. And so we were really pushing on that message. But what we were starting to see is what was missing was, but with that comes responsibility, right? So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And how can I exercise my rights of freedom of expression in a way that is still caring and compassionate and acknowledges that I am part of a community, and my hope is that I can sustain my positive and constructive participation and ongoing engagement with that community. So with the president's support, with this emerging need that we saw in our community, we move forward to identify a curriculum that we could use. So this leads to the second part that I was sort of asked to address, which is the how. So that's like the why and how we got here, right? So it was about well-being, it was about connection, belonging. It was about all of those things coming together, and then civil discourse as well. So in the how, Georgia Tech, like many of the institutions that are probably represented on this call, loosely coupled organization, highly decentralized. our earmark is creativity and innovation, and that oftentimes means a lot of autonomy and independence of thought. So to come up with an intervention that would have ownership shared across campus, academic affairs, M&A finance, student affairs, et cetera, we needed to engage a broad community. So we had an existing freedom of expression committee. We invited our shared governance representatives from academic senate, staff council, student government. We have an undergrad and grad, and then broad solicitation of input from our cabinet plus, which is the very extended cabinet senior leadership team. We selected an initial 6 vendors and these were recommended. Some of them folks had worked with, but we started with like, here are all the options. Here are the links, do some research, let us know, let's take a vote, submit your input. We went through that process and we narrowed down that process to 2. CDI was mostly one of them. And then we went to a more qualitative seeking of feedback. And in the end, the input from our students was what sold the day. And we ended up selecting Constructive Dialogue Institute because the students said, we want something that does not come across as political or partial, but that also really leans into helping us have conversations across difference with each other. Georgia Tech is over 50% international at the graduate student level, and we're about 12% international at the undergrad. So that was actually a dominant theme, is like, here we have this rich, diverse, intercultural, international community, but we're not leveraging it fully because we don't have the toolkit to do it. So with that, we move forward. The other thing is when you put something in and it seems set in stone, people don't like it. It's a target for critique. So we did a pilot. Right? Pilots are fungible. We're not fully committed. We're just moving in together, right? If it doesn't work out, we can change our minds. So year 1 was a pilot. And then I'll just close as we're reaching up on time. We did reach some difficulties because the intent was to have staff and faculty and students take the course. Our original launch schedule was disrupted because when the course was reviewed for release to staff and faculty, I will just say that we ran into some political barriers. There was a disagreement on what the course content signaled. And I think out of a desire to manage risk, a decision was made to not release the course to faculty and staff. But while that review was happening, we were asked to put a pause on our student release. So we eventually released. It was way later than we thought. And I'll just close by saying that last fall, our Board of Regents added a new requirement for training, is that in addition to free speech, we have to talk about civil discourse. So based on the initial feedback that we have received from the students who have taken the course, I've gotten solicited approval and consultation and feedback, and we're going to move forward with perspectives as our required curriculum for meeting that particular policy requirement in the fall. So come back next year to hear how we're doing.
Lilo, thank you so much for walking us through that history. And I think that a lot of the challenges that you were describing that all culminated in this initiative are things that a lot of campuses are struggling with and can probably relate to. I'm curious if you can share, are there other pieces of this work that you and your colleagues are thinking about at this moment to further support these endeavors?
Yeah, so this is embedded in a broader set of other curriculums. Over time, what I've learned is that part of successful culture change is you have to embed initiatives, right? So that they're interdependent, interrelated, and interconnected. So for example, we just launched a pilot first-year wellness experience so that every first-year student, 97% live on campus, are going to have gone through by the end, as of now, April, have gone through all 8 dimensions of wellness. And we linked Constructive Dialogue Institute Perspectives course with intellectual wellness. So that was one way in which we push that, right? It's about critical thinking. It's about your ability to, the second piece that we also have focused on is intercultural competence. It's what we know from the research our employers are saying is something that institutions, we ran that research, right? That confidence in higher education is declining. And some of that, let's be honest, is that we have to ask ourselves whether our curriculum is aligning with the needs of today and tomorrow. I know in my own field in higher ed, we worry that perhaps the next generation of student development professionals that we are training through the graduate curriculum doesn't necessarily reflect the challenges they will step into, right, in 4 to 5 years. And so intercultural competence was key. We actually established a new unit called Intercultural Competence. And the intent was that this office will eventually host and house this particular area. And then the third area is leadership. So we received a generous gift to support leadership development. And so we established John Lewis Student Leadership Pathways. And so again, this course is embedded and is an option for part of that leadership development. There's a lot of agency for students to decide which skill sets that they want to pursue. And so this is one part of that menu. So those are just a couple examples. I mean, it's embedded in lots of different places, but hopefully you can see that we're trying to tie it in with other initiatives and strong strategic priorities that we have. So it's not a standalone, here's the Constructive Dialogue Institute thing, right? It's really part of all these other initiatives that we see as important and how it has interplay and interconnectedness.
Great, thanks for talking through that. So we are now actually already at time for the joint Q&A. So I will, Lolo, I'll continue to ask you questions as we open it up to questions to both Maya and Lolo. But the first question is for you, Lolo, which is, it seems as though your approach is mandatory, whereas UCLA's approach is voluntary. And so the question was why you decided to move forward in that direction.
Okay, so I want to clarify that the pilot year was fully voluntary, because our thought was you don't come in with a stick right away. We wanted this to be something that students wanted. And, you know, as I did, for example, outreach, or as our director for student engagement was doing outreach sessions around free speech, freedom of expression, we typically end with it. And remember, right, we have this course and this is how you can access it. And so we pushed it out in that way so that it was more, you know, if you want to, and it kind of similar to what Maya was talking about. We're not making anyone do this, but this is something in your toolkit, right? That if this is something you're worried about, how do I have a conversation with another person where we have a difference of opinion? This is something that can help. The reason why we're going mandatory is because our University System of Georgia now has a new policy that requires all incoming new students to get training in civil discourse. I'm gonna be honest with you, civil discourse is a skill that many of us as adult professionals are still evolving. We didn't think like a 5-minute video was gonna cut it. And so in reviewing the course and the feedback we got from students is that perspectives was the right course, right, for this to meet this requirement. So we again socialize, hey, what do you think? We want to use this as the required module. So that's the why. That's why we moved to mandatory, is because we have to have mandatory training, and we'd rather provide quality training that's evidence-based and that we know right now has some positive feedback from our students. So that's the why.
And Maya, I'll turn the question to you. So I know that a question that came up earlier was about students who are attending these types of engagements. And so curious if there's a piece of the work that is mandatory, and if not, why you chose to pursue the opt-in model.
Sure. So I don't necessarily, we're not against mandatory by any means, and actually are exploring, there was another question about, are we exploring the general education requirements and how this fits into them? We are thinking about how do these skills, to Lolo's point, which are essential and need to be learned and practiced, how can these skills integrate into how we're teaching students to think, how we're teaching students to learn, to engage? And so I think it takes longer. Well, we don't have this sort of mandate yet to teach these skills from above that's sort of creating that window, but we do have a lot of leadership buy-in to explore what that would look like to make something like this mandatory or required, I guess would be a better way of putting it. Makes it feel, to Lola's point, a little bit less like something forced. So it's not that we're making it we're saying opt in a way to say we shouldn't require it. We're actually exploring. I think that the name of the game for us is many different entry points, and exploring what are those entry points and how can we make them attractive, and how can we integrate them into the existing student experience. So like our common experience book, which was the War for Kindness, we're exploring those kinds of shared experiences that already exist and seeing how can we bake in what we're doing so that it's a natural dovetail, that dialogue becomes a natural dovetail off of existing culture forming activities on campus.
Great. And another question that it seems a theme that has come up that I'll ask both of you is, can you talk a little bit about how you either have or thinking about approaching evaluation of your work?
Do you want me to take it first, Lola, or do you want to?
Either.
Right. So great central question. How do you measure it? How do you make sure it's working? This year, which is the first full year of our work, we're evaluating our different programs sort of in isolation. So we have surveys around our workshops. We have an evaluation for our faculty fellowship, and we are doing sort of informal quantitative data collection and tracking. For next year, we're thinking about ways of deepening that evaluation. So actually, we're doing some test student focus groups that our fantastic graduate student fellow Felicia Graham is spearheading, to see what has been the impact on students with different levels of engagement. A student who's just attended a workshop, a student who's attended a public program, a student who has been an intern with us, who's now, who's applying for a grant. To think about, to do a focus group on what has the impact been for you? How has this influenced your leadership skills? And we're using that to inform what a sort of a broad scale evaluation process might look like next year. Our big challenge, and this is a challenge, and I really welcome anyone who's figured this out. How do we both evaluate the success of our individual interventions and projects and programs, and also the broader culture change? Maybe this is in the CDI report, Caroline, how we can get better at that, because that's one of our main goals for next year.
Absolutely.
So I think I agree with Maya. I think the challenge of assessment is a challenge. It's difficult, and I'll give you an example. Is well-being is this complicated outcome, and oftentimes people go, well, we have a well-being service, and I'm like, there really is not such a thing as a well-being service, right? Because generally well-being is not the outcome of a service or a program, is the cumulative impact of multiple factors, both self-driven and obtained from external factors, that over time create in a self-perceived, self-reported outcome of well-being. So I think for us, what we're going to look at is include this. We have campus climate surveys that are already assessed, administered to at regular intervals. We have a number of well-being related items. And then also NESE, for example, there is a question in National Survey on Student Engagement, my apology for using an acronym there, that looks at having meaningful dialogue with others across difference, right? And so I think what we want to do is not necessarily have a one-off, but to look at data that we're collecting in other ways and track our movement over time. We're already seeing positive results. I've been here 4 years, and our data from the latest ACHA National College Health Assessment shows the needle has moved, right? We can't say which one thing has assessed that. But the other thing we're going to do is similar to our first year wellness experience, is that we built in an assessment plan, right? So right now we're doing pre-test and post-test on specifically knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors around the 8 dimensions of wellness. I think as we move to this, even though it's going to be mandatory, we still want to have some assessment. So I think we're going to have some, indicator to try to look at pre-test, post-test, so to speak, and then focus groups, right? To talk about over their time, their first couple weeks on campus, how are they doing? How has this course helped you or not helped you? Right now, our goal is to require it, but you have till end of December to take it. So we'll have some options in terms of how we can measure and assess. By the way, I see some questions in the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and just answer them in line.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I apologize. There's so many rich questions, and unfortunately, we won't have time to get to all of them. So Maya and Lolo, if you're able to quickly address them in the chat, that'd be wonderful. And I'll just begin wrapping up today's webinar by really thanking our panelists so much for coming and sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us. We really, really appreciate it. For those of you who haven't already, we encourage you to download our campus culture report. There's a lot of rich information that will help you advance strategies to do this work on your campuses. If you're interested in learning more about any of our programming and how we might be able to support you, we encourage you to reach out to our team at growth@constructivedialogue.org. And also, this webinar is going to be posted online in the next day or so, and you'll also receive an email of the recording, so stay tuned for that. And just want to wrap up by really reflecting what we heard today and recognizing that implementing constructive dialogue practices isn't just theoretical. We're seeing how this work is happening right now at forward-thinking institutions across the country. And the trust deficit facing higher ed today presents both a challenge and an opportunity. And by embracing constructive dialogue as a tool to enhance intellectual inquiry, build campus cohesion, prepare students for civic life, and develop workplace skills, universities are not just rebuilding trust, but they're also really fulfilling their deepest purposes as institutions of higher education. So I want to thank you all today for taking the time to join us, and we hope that you find our report useful, and wishing you all a wonderful end to the term. Thank you so much.